Now, what's the big deal with Old Mutual's big return home? There were kudu horns being blown and there was a lot of fanfare and excitement and puppets in the streets and dancing and ululating as Old Mutual's former UK arm, which listed as Quilter on Monday, and then Old Mutual's African and emerging markets business listed on the JSE on Tuesday. We're taking stock on these and other movements with Vestact's Theron and Maudi Lenstoane from Lehumo Capital. All that coming up in just a little bit. What is the big deal about this Old Mutual thing, other than they're not going to be spending 100 billion rand a year on a head office in London, which, let's face it, over 20 years is pricey? What's the big deal about Old Mutual coming home?
Look, I think the big deal is just in terms of the company itself, its origin, how, the number of years that it's been in existence, but also what's been fascinating. I mean, since the whole separation, managed separation started 2 years ago, it was just quite fascinating. There was something that needed to happen. It was a massive company that I think was confusing. I'm sure, many of the management, also from an investment perspective, I mean, just trying to evaluate it as the size of what it was becoming more complex. It's now been separated into very easy to understand lean businesses that are probably going to be more focused in terms of their strategy going forward. So very, very exciting, and I see some excitement for vuvuzelas being blown around.
Around Sandton. It was very noisy in Sandton yesterday. Very, very noisy indeed. Theron, are you enthralled, excited, enticed?
No, not really.
I didn't think you would
given the whole thing a big pass. I mean, my friend Trevor Manuel has done great work in reprofiling that company, and I think they will do fine. But really, I mean, it feels a little bit like, Napoleon's remaining French troops straggling back to Paris because, after the Russian invasion. The Old Mutual globalization strategy was a manifest failure. And what we're really doing now is kind of going back to what we had before. Obviously, the UK business is an amalgam of things that they bought there, and that's Quilter. And, everybody that had Old Mutual shares will get 1/3 of a Quilter share, so that's all good and well. I don't know what they'll do with that. The other international aspirations have all gone by the wayside. But, obviously Old Mutual Africa does have some pretty substantial operations.
Over the last 20 years, though, during this little gallivant around the globe, 75% of profits have consistently been made primarily in South Africa as part of this emerging markets business.
And they're overpaid for lots and lots of things. Scandia and other bits and pieces of business, the Old Mutual Asset Management business in the US and so on. They had some real disasters in the financial crisis. So
they nearly went bust in the financial crisis. Remember, the share price went down to about 4 rand, and it was make or break as to whether or not they had some very dodgy bonds that they had exposure to in 2008. And it was make or break as to whether or not Old Mutual was going to crack it, and they pulled it back from the brink.
Emergency, kind of recapitalization operations. They had to shunt cash into that Bermuda-based entity, which had sold products guaranteeing certain returns in Asian markets. But, that's kind of what happens. It's all about timing in life. I mean, there are other companies that were criticized for not getting going and heading global, and then it turned out they had done the better. It's just a matter of tides. It's what happens in corporate cycles.
I spent some quiet moments earlier on this week trolling the chief executive of the JSE on social media, because if you be on social media, then you must be trolled on social media. I sent Nicky Newton-King a message saying, why has there not been an announcement out of Steinoff Africa Retail? The management team of the speciality division of Steinoff Africa Retail, 25% of revenue, just 7% of profit, walked out en masse on Monday, a month after the founder of Tekkie Town, Bram van Heestien, was sort of sidelined and then resigned from Steinoff Africa Retail. There seemed to be something of a civil war internally at Steinoff Africa Retail, and they haven't issued a statement at all on the Stock Exchange News Service. Now, apparently, there's no need to do it, even though it's such a big part of the business. I find that kind of weird.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting what's been happening with Steinoff. I mean, if you just go back, I think probably just given the size, the magnitude of the crisis, it probably should have been suspended, but it wasn't suspended, overseas, and therefore perhaps the JSE is following into the same, pretty much just looking at what's happening in Frankfurt, where they listed. So, I agree. It's quite worrying what's unfolding there, and it's something that I think the regulator, should have actually taken some steps to try and prevent.
And Christopher Visa sold another 3.5 billion rands worth of ShopRite shares, possibly
Yes.
to shore up some positions he's got across multiple companies, Paul, that are struggling right now.
Yep. Look, again, he had a lot of boats out there, and we know that things ended as badly as they could possibly at the international level. I mean, Stein of Africa Retail didn't fulfill its merger with ShopRite.
Isn't Christopher Visa the luckiest guy in South Africa today as a result of that?
Very lucky. As for Stein of Africa Retail, I mean, they're having this brawl in the lower divisions, but, you know, it's like a fight in the stands at a Springbok rugby game. I mean, you can't call the referee to deal with every sort of problem. What did Nikki say? Did she get back to you and say, well, look, it doesn't meet the requirements?
It doesn't meet the thresholds of requirement. It's a divisional chief executive, not a group executive. So there are very good reasons as to why they've not been obliged to do it.
You can't put your dirty laundry on Sens, for goodness sake. We always argue that these companies that put press releases with their good news shouldn't be on Sens. So leave that bad news off Sens.
No. I disagree. I think there should be a level of transparency, but it does illustrate to you, perhaps, the fact that they haven't done it, that they're prepared to allow the rumour mills to circulate, that actually there's more in there than we think.
And Brahm says he's going to go and start a new business called Techie Town 2.
I don't know. Has he said that?
Well, I don't know.
I think it's implied. It's implied that you have a walk out of 100 people out of a business on one day. I mean, okay, an executive can go and he's made enough money in his life to retire, but you take 100 people with you, you've got to have a plan B.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he owns he's the landlord.
He's the landlord of the head office of this, and he's evicted them. He's evicted his mate, who they're still friends, received the eviction notice. So, so you got to leave my office. So he did.
Probably he's going to set up in the same office.
Yeah.
You know, he's just saying you've run your lease and please get out so I can implement my own.
Yeah, there's one profession better than financial services right now, and that's to be a Stellenbosch lawyer, because these guys are going to make an absolute
Maybe that's
killing.
why Christopher Visa had to sell all those shares. He's raising money to pay all of his lawyers.
I suspect so. I mean, and we joke, but it could be entirely true as well. Lawyers are licking their lips in anticipation of the fights that are happening over the collapse in the value of Steinhoff, of course, and then all of the fallout that is happening as a result of the engineering that occurred in the structuring and the creation of Steinhoff Africa Retail. More on this juicy and spicy conversation after the break.